Hello, everyone. Welcome to another discussion of the second season of Rings of Power. This is going to be a discussion of episode 5, where I have to admit, as much as it pains me, that AP was actually right. It's you have no idea how difficult it is for me to admit this, but AP was right. I was watching episode 5 and thinking to myself, oh, AP was right. But specifically, you mentioned, I thought, a comment that I agreed with at the time, but I really saw how right you are while watching episode 5, and that was that the whole Numenorian thread in here could be its own show. It almost deserves to be its own show. And I think episode 5 really did show us what, at the moment at least, to me, feel like the strongest threads in this series. So I'm curious to hear your reactions to episode 5. I think you have some structural observations to make as well, which is a bit of a compliment, but also a critique in a sense. But lay it all out, AP.
Well, first of all, why are you surprised that I was right? Like, how many times do I have to be right,
It's an
Philip?
annoying habit. It's an annoying habit of yours. We have to do something about this.
And yet you celebrate all those times that I'm wrong as well. The First off, let me say I think this episode is called the Doors of Durin.
Hmm.
I might have misremembered that, but I really like this episode.
I do
One of
too.
the reasons why I like this episode is it focused more heavily on two major sort of threads.
Yeah.
We had the Dwarven storyline and the Eregion storyline.
Right.
The weight was given behind both of these, and it was sort of moving between them. This, I think, goes to an issue that we had discussed in relation to season 1, and that I might have mentioned in a previous discussion we had about this season. When the writers chose to do all of this, they conflated timelines in order to try and do all of these different storylines,
Right.
and have them run concurrently. Streaming services have this bizarre notion that 8 shows is the magic number. And presumably they've done market research that proves that 8 is the magic number.
Uh-huh.
Not 9, as we find out in this. But
Uh-huh.
with all of these things, I think in trying to cram so much in, and each of these storylines has an incredible amount of material and stuff that can happen and great characters, that so many of them could have been the central thread of the show.
Right.
But in trying to do all of them, no one thread really gets enough time,
Yes, I agree.
and it feels rushed and compressed. And because of the time compression that they have done as well, that
Mm.
exacerbates it. And
Yeah.
the thing is, I really liked this episode. I enjoyed this episode. This was a much slower episode. It was more about talking and the building of tension and things happening, but it wasn't action focused. It was
Right.
all
Right.
actual narrative, the actual story, which is the stuff that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
But I think in this we can see how the Numenorian storyline on its own
Mm.
could have been an entire TV show.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
The political machinations, the tension between the king's men, sort of the almost the secular, materialist, realist form of we want all of these things and we're envious of the immortality of the elves,
Yeah.
and a whole political storyline. And then the conflict that they have with the faithful, who are more religious and tradition bound, and that link to the spiritual. That like is a fascinating tension to
It is.
explore.
Yeah.
And yet in this, there's, because of that compression, yes, they had foreshadowed this, they had signaled this, but we're moving through it so quickly that it almost doesn't have time to settle and develop.
Yeah.
It feels that we're hitting the high notes each time.
Let me give a
And
quick example, I think, to illustrate, because I feel the same way that you do. First of all, I did love the episode. I thought it was one of the strongest of the whole series so far. I thought it was those tensions that you mentioned were really well done in this episode. It felt more balanced than the previous two episodes, which I thought were very wobbly at best. So episode 5 really did get back on track. But I did have my moments where I felt like, they're just trying to again put too much into this. Like, for example, when Elrond is running back to tell Gilgalad about we get one scene with showing him running so fast and he's taking his cloak off and he's running through the woods. And then the next time we see him, there's Gilgalad kind of like doing his thing, looking like he's pondering, the universe. And suddenly Elrond shows up at Gilgalad's place and looking, by the way, not a drop of sweat or anything, perfectly immaculate. Like I know he's an elf, but still.
Legolas never sweated.
I know. Okay, fine, fine. But not even a smudge of dirt. He just kind of shows up and not even out of breath. He's still running, but he shows up. we we have to relocate the armies. We have to do and I just thought I wish that had been given a little more time to steep, that it felt abrupt to me.
Do you remember? Do you remember
Almost comically so. Almost
Yeah.
comically. Yeah.
But do you remember Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Lancelot. Yeah.
Lancelot running out, hi, and then suddenly just teleports in.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and this is a criticism I have of actually, I don't watch a lot of TV, this. But when I do, I almost always feel like everything is compressed too much that way. And it is a product of perhaps the medium, but it is just an issue that I have whenever I watch a story on screen. I feel like, oh, that's so abrupt. And that maybe it's just me as more of a reader than a screen watcher. But I do think that this is also partly a product of they have so much to do, in 8 episodes, and they're trying to cram in this and that and the other, and it just sometimes feels very abrupt to me. But anyway, I don't know if that's an example of what you were talking about, but
Yeah, because like in this episode we have Numenor, we have Khazad-dûm, and we have Eregion. Like these are all really great storylines.
they're really
And
good. Yeah.
In particular, the Celebrimbor and Sauron aspects of this were great. The stuff in Khazad-dûm was great. The stuff in Numenor was great. But each one of them, I really wish that studios would give more time for writers to explore
Yes.
the, and it's going to sound weird saying this about like elves and dwarves and stuff, but the human moments and
Right.
those scenes that we have where we have like Disa and Durin talking about things and we see the ramification of what's going on.
Yeah.
Those scenes are the scenes that really give a storyline resonance rather than a plot point.
Right.
And yeah, there's been a big transition in cinema and also from TV where there has been a movement towards not quite as far as this, but almost getting to summary of plot point. Hit the next beat, hit the next beat, hit the next beat.
Yeah.
That is a movement that has happened in TV and cinema.
Right.
Like to suit the modern audience's tastes about move on, move on, move on. How many times have we seen people talking about books and it's all about the thing that happened, not how it was explored?
Right.
That there's this focus on just tell me what happened, because I don't want to waste my time reading the book. I just want to know what happened. And you go, that is plot point summary.
Oh my goodness, that's so sad. Yeah.
And many of us would shrink back from that because that's not what we enjoy about reading. It's not what we enjoy about storytelling.
Right.
But that is actually incredibly common in a much more general audience. And remember, TV shows are not aimed at book readers. Book readers are a tiny niche audience.
Yep.
Compared to the audience that studios want TV shows aimed at. And writers frequently love the source material, but they are serving multiple masters. You have the studio saying, here are limitations. You have the studio saying, you must do it in this way. Oh, we want this demographic targeted. We want it to do this thing. They have all of those things that they're doing. Then they're trying to please a general audience, not necessarily a book audience.
Right.
But they also don't want to alienate a book audience because that book audience is usually who they are as well. They almost always are fans of the material. That's why they want to adapt it.
Yep.
But in trying to do all of these things, they become quite often the scapegoat for book fans saying, you're not doing it properly. If they lean too much into catering to book fans, they get accused of fan service and alienating general fan or general TV
Right.
watchers.
Right.
And it's it's a no-win situation with beloved properties.
It really, I would never want to be a screenwriter for a really popular book series. I would never want to do that. Yeah, but yes, I think that it's important for us to explore that because it does explain a lot of, I think, what are some of the weaknesses of this show, but I don't think it's unique to this show, you know.
No, no, not at all. And it's really weird. I remember a lot. One of the criticisms of season one, and it's partly a criticism I had as well. But one of the criticisms was if you were not familiar with Tolkien's works, quite often it was like you couldn't necessarily follow the nuance or why people were doing things. The motivations weren't clear. It was almost
Right.
predicated on your knowledge of stuff in Tolkien's works.
Right.
And that was a criticism that a number of people had of season one, including myself, that I don't think the season one walked that line neatly enough. I think sometimes it's strayed too far one way or too far the other,
Uh-huh.
either over explaining something or oversimplifying something, or not explaining it at all because they went, oh, well, sure, everyone knows this. That was a major problem in season one. So in season two, when they have simplified some of these concepts
Mm,
and some of the complexity, people are, oh, they don't understand. You're like, no, they do understand. But one of the major criticisms of season one was they were playing with too much of the complexity and nuance that's in Tolkien's work. And sometimes you need to simplify things. And again, because the studio has said it must be done in X amount of time, and
right.
they are telling multiple stories within that time frame, then you can see why simplification might work better for a general audience rather than, oh, the writers don't know what they're talking about. Oh, the
Well,
writers don't understand. Oh, the writers did. Oh, you're like, really? You go to intentionality that the writers have no idea, as opposed to this is highly complex. We do not have time for it. A general audience is not going to understand this. We would need 3 or 4 episodes dedicated to this one thing. I know. Why don't we simplify it?
right. Well, then you have
Which
the additional layer in this case, which is something that is very clear in some of our interactions and comments on previous discussions of this show. But you have this additional layer of Tolkien actually not having decided on a lot of things, like the origins of orcs, for example, or waffling, and or something that if you really dig down and you analyze it, as much as I'm a huge Tolkien fan, I mean, he's the person who got me into to be a reader in the first place, and my whole life path as a result of reading Lord of the Rings.
and
But
your PhD.
and my PhD, everything. I mean, I'm a huge fan, but I will admit that he left certain things very vague, or if you really dig down, uh, maybe if you're just reading, these things like, for example, the creation of the rings, the way he told that, or the way we have it in, he didn't finish telling these stories. They're edited, they're brought out by his son, et cetera, et cetera. So he hadn't decided on a lot of things, or he left a lot of things vague. And frankly, if you dig down a little bit into the creation of the rings, you could probably find some issues with the way it's presented in the Silmarillion. And the showmakers are having to deal with all of this him waffling on certain things, and they have to commit one way or the other, or they tweak in order to make it make sense. Because sometimes, I'm saying this as a humongous Tolkien fan, sometimes the way we have it, if you think about it for a few moments, doesn't always make the most sense. So, there are issues that I feel bad for these showmakers are trying to put this into a narrative that actually is compelling, because they're taking material that wasn't meant to be necessarily um, told in this fashion. But anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and like even when you think of a general audience who's completely ignorant of a lot of Tolkien stuff, then you have a slightly more smaller audience who are familiar with, say, Jackson's Lord of the Rings films,
Uh-huh.
and then you have fans of Tolkien's work, and then you have the super fans,
Right.
who have memorized huge chunks and they love it. You go, that's a broad range of different interests. But one of the things that a lot of people who know anything about the Lord of the Ring, they know the ring poem, or at least they're familiar with that. They mightn't be able to recite it, but they know the ring poem.
Right.
If people know the ring poem, that is what a lot of people will be expecting in the show. So instead of having, oh, they made a whole load of minor rings, and then they made all of these other rings that the elves were wearing, and then Sauron made the one ring, and then he came for the other, and the elves took off their rings, and then Sauron over the millennia like gathered up rings, and then he gave some to, you know, it starts getting complicated. It's not neat
Right.
and it's not straightforward. Oh yeah,
Right.
but that's how it happened in the Legendarium. You're like, yes, but this is a TV show, and a TV show has to try and make things a little simpler, because we one of the things that Tolkien said was the elves took off their rings, but we know that Lothlorien and Rivendell are both created and supported by Galadriel and Elrond using their rings.
Right.
We know that Gandalf uses his ring. But the elves took off their rings to hide them from Sauron. Yeah, they hid them by wearing them and creating two magical enclaves.
Right.
Yeah, but they weren't corrupted by Sauron. Well, if the rings weren't corrupted by Sauron, then
Wow.
why hide them?
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can go through and we can start teasing out and rationalizing things, but Tolkien never created a very definitive, this is what the events actually are, this is how
Exactly.
exactly it happened. These were fragments, these were notes, these were
Almost
ideas.
myths, right? They're myths in a way. And if you know anything about myths, you know that there are several variations when you're talking about a myth, right? Oftentimes when we're talking about myths, there are different
But
variations that are contradictory even.
you're not saying that the myth of King Arthur there isn't just a definitive version, are you?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
This is, but again, it comes up in conversation. People go, oh, but the show is doing allegory. You're like, no, the show is using symbolism. Tolkien had no problem with symbolism, giving viewers or readers, the audience, the ability to interpret things. That's what Tolkien was all about. He
Right.
loved that. He loved that flexibility to give the audience the power to apply what they saw to their specific circumstances and understanding.
Right.
What he disliked was a singular reading that it must mean X.
Yeah.
That's what his famous sort of cordial dislike, not I hate, cordial dislike
Right.
of allegory was. And again, people overstate it when they go, oh, but Tolkien was trying to write a myth for England because it didn't have one. Um, Arthur? Like
Yeah.
King Arthur exists. Like you are aware of the giant sort of history of Arthurian mythology
Yeah.
associated with England. Again, it gets overstated
Right.
and simplified. And you go, right. And that's what we do when we talk about these things. And yet we criticize the writers of this show for doing exactly the same thing,
Yeah.
for simplifying things to make it easier to fit in the time frame that they have. But anyway, we've talked about the
Yeah.
theoretics of this probably a bit too much.
But now we'll
Um,
talk about the specifics of the show. So we
well,
mentioned three threads. Which one do you want to start with?
well, why don't we start with a quibble I have?
Quibble. Okay.
Because people think that you're just shills for the show. I'm still waiting on that check. Did you get yours yet?
I have to have my people contact Jeff because I still haven't gotten my check.
You still call him Jeff? Like he's Jay to me, because that's how close we are, obviously. Um, there is this wonderful, and I really enjoyed the sequence and the scene of Celebrimbor with Narvi, and they're having that reception and they're talking, and Celebrimbor doing that really awkward I'm the host and I'm trying to make a joke. And you can see he is not a particularly good public speaker. Like that's
Right.
not his forte. And they're looking at the doors that are going to end up in Moria, that we know from Moria. And we can see the etching on it. The etching that only shows up in moonlight.
Right. Yes. Oops.
And I was looking at it and I went, is that meant to be a model of it? No, no, those are the actual doors. I mean, if they're get the CGI team to stick a moon in the background and have them rotate it so the moonlight hits it and
And
then
it
suddenly it all
is.
lights up. Like
Yeah.
if they had done that, I think that scene would have been brilliant.
Yeah.
But 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 they didn't. And
No.
so I just was sitting there going, oh, there's a goof.
Slight. Slight.
But yeah, why don't we start with the well, we'll talk very briefly about the minor Elrond stuff and
Okay.
Gil-galad. That's very short.
Yeah.
Elrond doing his running and then the dramatic casting off of the cloak. It was such a wonderful action cliche.
Yeah.
The slow motion running and then the casting off of the cloak. Slightly reminiscent of like the Jackson shot of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli trying to track the orcs that had taken Merry and Pippin. Slightly
Yeah.
reminiscent of that sequence. But the casting of the cloak, I looked at it and I was like, there's your action shot in slow-mo. Have you been talking to Zack Snyder?
Uh-oh.
But and then he ends up running into Gil-galad to say, oh, the orcs are marching on Lindon. Or sorry, on Eregion.
Region. Yeah.
And there are two things I actually quite liked about Gil-galad's reaction.
Yeah.
He has come round to Elrond's way of thinking
But
and sees Sauron as a threat and assumes that Sauron has an army. So
mm,
we see that even though he realizes that Sauron is a threat and they want to be careful about this, and he's been preempted by that vision of destruction and the rise of the power of Sauron, all of which we know is coming, he makes a mistake in understanding the information in front of him and
right.
assumes that Sauron has this army, therefore they need their army to defeat Sauron. And Elrond is sort of going, but Adar has an army. The army is there. Can we deal with the threat that is there? And yet that's exactly the reasoning that Elrond had used earlier, which is like, you're in Sauron's maze. Like he is doing this. Like you even using these rings is
Mm,
playing into Sauron's plans. And you can see that when you don't have, like we as viewers know far more about what's going on than the characters do. They are guessing from all of these tiny fragments of information. And so it creates that dramatic irony where we understand as viewers. Ezer talked about this in Gap Theory. We understand what's happening. We get the dramatic irony that Gil-galad is about to make a huge mistake here
right.
because he's making this decision not based on the information that we have, but on the information he has.
Right.
And I actually liked that because it places it in understanding the character motivation, understanding the character point of view. Why wouldn't Gil-galad just go and do that thing? And it's he fears what Sauron is doing and has made an assumption about how Sauron is going to do it. And I thought that was very clear. So I actually quite liked that sequence. And again, the rings, not understanding the true power of the rings, not understanding them. They've
Mm,
only just received them. It's not like Celebrimbor gave them an instruction manual.
right.
Here's how you reboot it. Here's, have you changed the batteries?
Well, and then these are what these rings are an example of what the kids these days call soft magic, right? There is no instruction manual. And there's, as Sauron or Anatar explains later on, there's a matter of spirit or intent. It's not just the mechanics of how you make these rings, you know. So I love all that. And I think, yeah, Gil-galad is making a calculated decision here. He wants to allow the two Adar and Sauron to destroy each other before he acts, and that is probably a big mistake. Yes,
Well,
but
why don't we talk about Numenor?
Okay, sounds good. Let's do it. Numenor. I enjoyed this very much. As you said, there's some really good machinations going on. The thing I think that is strongest about these threads, what makes them strong for me, is how thematically linked they are. How these are so beautifully exploring issues of power and ambition and pride. And you see them again and again very successfully going back to these themes in a way that is just organic, that is woven into the story. Because of course, these were themes that were very important to Tolkien. These are themes when people say they want shows to be faithful adaptations. This is what I think of as faithful because they're exploring an issue that Tolkien explored with incredible depth and sensitivity and obvious interest in. And yes, they're doing it in different ways, and the presentation is different. The details are somewhat different, but they are exploring that theme in a way that I feel is very Tolkienian, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I love what they're doing in terms of Miriel and her as a contrast to Pharazôn, because of what motivates her in her decision making. Even in the point where she tells Elendil, look, I know what you're saying, and but sometimes we have to be the quiet observer. We have to allow things to happen, and he has trouble comprehending what she's saying, where she's coming from. But she's showing this incredible wisdom, this selflessness, in contrast to Pharazôn, who is all about. He's the con man. It's all about me, and I'm going to, and this isn't enough. I'm gonna, hey, they told us we couldn't go here, and we're the greatest. We're the best of all. We're the greatest nation on earth, and we're gonna do what we want because we're awesome. And it's about me. So I think that contrast is really well done in this thread. And that the fight for the identity of Numenor is leading to some really tragic results. It's breaking up families. You have Elendil and his daughter at odds completely and going in different directions here. And it's interesting because her response to all this is it's out of grief. It's not her ambition really that's talking here, but she is somehow allowed that grief to blind her or to persuade her into siding with the ambitious, the power mongers. So anyway, what are your thoughts on this thread?
Well, firstly, I really liked how in this particular episode we get our Farazan articulates the main reason why certain Numenorians hate the elves. We
Right.
actually get it overtly articulate because in season one there was all this. When Galadriel, this is the beginning of the elves coming back, and you have, they're going to come in and they're going to steal our jobs, and people were like, but it's one elf. You're like, oh, it's not like a politician would take something entirely out of context and drum up hate of a minority group
Right.
in order to achieve more power. We have no examples of that in the modern day. But
That's an
here we
old one.
see,
Yeah.
here we see Farazan actually say, what is at the bottom of it is that the elves are immortal. The elves have this ability to go to Valen. They can go to this promised land,
Right.
and they are denied that. As men, they are mortal and they will die. Why do the elves get that?
Right.
We are great. Look at what we have built. Why can't we have what they have? That
Right.
envy. And we see even Kemen, the sniveling little wretch, he's quite taken aback. He thought his father just wanted to be king. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, his father is going further than that. And Kemen is small-minded, quite literally, in a number of senses, I think.
Yes.
And we see that Farazan is driven by this great envy, this jealousy, that he wants what other people have. He wants that power. He wants that immortality. And that has corrupted him. It's not about what is best for Numenor. It's about what he craves. And we see that reflected again, this craving of power for power's sake, or this wanting power that other people have.
Right.
And I really like that they articulate, that they give the audience now the very direct reason why Numenorians would be anti-elf.
Yeah. Yeah.
And throughout the storyline, then you pointed out that Iarian is motivated by grief, but she's also the engineer, the mathematician, the
Yeah.
I can work things out. She's rooted in the physical,
Right.
and she rejects the spiritual. And that's what we have with the Kingsmen. That's what we have with the faithful. We see this
Yeah.
divide. And of course, Tolkien's world operates on a very spiritual level.
Yeah.
And we keep getting this dichotomy between the one world and the unseen world, between the material reality and the spiritual reality,
Right.
about what will be and trusting in fate, or we will carve our own way. And this is a fascinating sequence of dichotomies that we see explored in the different things. Because Farazan's craving for this power and to get this immortality, we could link quite thematically to Durin then and this awakening of greed. But we can get to that in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. When you
Um,
think about the culminating scene, I think with Valendil's death, and that whole, as you say, this more secular versus spiritual approach, and the smashing of the
idol.
statue and all of that. Valendil, interestingly, he's a friend of of Isildur especially, but of Elendil and the family in general, and he his tragic death is terrible. Valendil's also the name of Isildur's son, I believe, his eventual son. So I think the show is setting up a kind of, or maybe he names him after his friend or something like that. But
Well, it's
uh,
not like Tolkien ever reused the same name. Glorfindel.
Glorfindel, yeah, there's a few names he reused. Yeah, but yeah, I
Durin.
thought that scene was poignant, and really brought that thread to a really a boiling point, and Elendil's arrest, and all of that under this scene with incredible tension that erupts essentially. But thoughts on
And
it?
I love that moment where the Sea Guard are being disbanded, but we have that
Yes,
um Captain Living Deck moment.
right.
Again, the insistence on honor and tradition, and it being run roughshod over by the more, well, no, we're changing things, we're going to move forward, it's all progress, we're going to have new things. What did the Romans ever give us? An aqueduct. um smash down history, smash down tradition, smash down
Right.
belief and the spiritual to pave way for progress and generative AI,
Yeah.
and for that disregard of tradition. It's not that tradition must be blindly adhered to,
Right.
but the absolute disregard of it, because I don't care for it, therefore no one should care for it. Again, it's locating so much of this in a selfish response. And even Aeria, she's motivated by her own selfish pain,
Right.
because she's saying, "Oh, it's all Muriel's fault and the Elfstone's fault that Isildur died." She hasn't once gone to her father and realized he's lost a son as well, or so they think.
Right.
There's no reaching out to her father about this. Her father was the commander. She doesn't blame him.
Right.
She's fixated on her grief and is scapegoating someone. And again, we see that they're pointing to an external threat incorrectly to justify things that we know are wrong.
Right. Just
And I
to
thought that had enormous resonance with what is happening in a lot of different places in the world today.
Absolutely. Yeah, very important theme. And Tolkien saw that, he brought that theme out beautifully in his writing. But just a point of clarification for me, because I keep going back to this thought, but Anarion, the other son of Elendil, was mentioned, I thought, in the first season. But
Wasn't
he hasn't appeared really here. I do. Am I imagining that they mentioned him in the first season?
I'm fairly sure they mentioned him, but I thought he was in the West, where the faithful have gathered, like on the far west of,
Right.
and no one's gone looking for him.
Okay. I'm just wondering if they're going to bring him into this or not, because he's
Yeah,
kind of important,
yeah, and I think with Elendil's vision from the Palantir, he sees himself riding to the west, and I think that might be the foreshadowing of him going to find an Aryan.
right.
But I could be I could be wrong. Like, it's not statistically unlikely, but I could be.
And they gave us a pretty brutal foreshadowing of Aarian's fate, I think, when Elendil. Basically, it's a metaphor for him, but it's going to be literalized when she goes down with the rest of Numenor under the water. But he talks about the dangers of, the depths and all of that. So we got a little bit of those words are going to come back, I'm
Um,
sure. Yeah.
but one last thing about Farazan and Muriel. I like how Muriel, when she asks about what Elendil saw, sh he sees a completely different vision, and you can see almost her immediate thought process. Well, hang on a sec, what's changed? Farazan is now,
Right.
hey, let him do it because it is better for me to give up my power. And
He sees a
for
higher
Numenor,
purpose working in all of this.
to do something different, if that keeps Numenor alive. Her focus is her people.
Right.
Elendil's focus is, I'll give up my sword. I won't fight and cause this whole rift in the city because I want to protect my people, doing what is best for the others. Whereas with Farazan, we get this wonderful moment where he unveils the Palantir, the thing, oh, the elf stone that we should destroy. And you're like, he's not going to destroy it. He knows there's some sort of power there that he can use. So we see how little that Farazan actually believes in anything.
Right.
Everything
The
is
only
like,
thing Farazan believes in is Farazan. Right.
and he even is partially disgusted by his own son because his own son is small-minded, thinks too small, is a
A weasel
cowardly, weaselly little toe rag. And
who stabs someone from behind. Right.
although I have to say that I actually quite enjoyed that fight. And the one thought that popped into my head when Valendel sort of breaks Kerman's arm, I went, I don't think Jimmy Nuts would approve of that move.
Oh. Yeah. It's not exactly a legal move, I guess. Yeah.
Um, but again, we see that they honor, like, you don't just kill someone because
Right.
the fight was over. He had defeated him, and it's like, but I'm not going to take that step further. Valendel's morality is intact.
Right.
And we see that Kemen does the dishonorable thing, the evil thing, that no belief in honor, no belief in tradition, no care for anything. And the fact that this makes him look bad, that he ran someone through from behind in a fit of pique and anger.
Right.
Again, selfishness. And people go, oh, but it's such a trope that this happens. You're like, yeah, tropes like this happen because they show us the tragic sacrifice of a hero as opposed to the pragmatic murder of a bunch of people.
Right.
Like, yeah, because killing people is generally something we regard as bad.
Right. Yes. For good
Um,
reason.
but no, so I actually quite enjoyed that. I just, again, as we were saying earlier, their entire show could have been the storyline of Numenor. I
Yeah.
think
Oh,
it's so
easily.
rich
Yeah.
that and they could have spaced things out. They could have had more development. It would have been closer to like HBO's Rome in a story like that.
Sure.
But
Sure. This
so
is
do you want
really
to?
nice. Yeah.
Will we move on then to
Yeah, we've
uh,
got the dwarves and we've got Eregion. So, which
which
would
do
you
you want?
like to do? Which one?
Which one would you like to do? I'll let
Oh,
you.
okay. We they are very much tied to each other as well. So we could start with I think Eregion is the most central though, really.
Well, do you want to finish on that because that's the big one?
Okay, we'll finish on Eregion and then we'll do the what's happening with the dwarves with our friends there. Do you want to tell us your initial thoughts on that thread? I thought that it was very well done. And once again, I'm enjoying the tension between father and son, and the clashing visions that are happening. Again, with the influence now of the ring, which is easily, you can see how it's preying on Durin the seniors, his arrogance or his stubbornness or his ambition, whatever it might be. But he is definitely more susceptible. Whereas Disa, there's a wonderful scene where she asked her husband, Durin Jr., promise me you're not going to put one of those rings on, right? That was a great moment, I thought.
Yeah.
And his response to that also was brilliant, I felt. So
I-
there's a nice tension contrast being set up there. Thoughts on this thread?
Well, one of the things I thought was really interesting in this is so obviously the episode, the sequence starts with Durin Senior not giving Durin Junior back his position at the
Right.
very beginning, but he's actually warm and compliments us. It's like, oh, you were the one who went to the elves and you got us this power, and
Yeah.
you know it was the whole "I love you and I forgive you" scene that we wanted in the
But
previous,
in a creepy twist, though.
and yet it's being motivated. You can see that the motivate. It's I now have this thing, I like this thing, and you got it for me. Therefore, I love you, and
You're right.
it's so bittersweet that we get that forgiveness and love and reunion between father and son, but it's almost motivated by the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And so it's really bittersweet. And then at the end, when we see uh Durin speaking to Durin, he's like warning him about the ring, and his father goes, "But I can give you your position back."
With the symbol of the collar there. Yeah.
And again, it's does Durin Jr. does he take his position back for selfish reasons, or is he doing it because he can help mitigate what his father is doing? And I would lean toward the interpretation that by being closer to his father again and having that position, instead of being one of the random miners as he was at the beginning,
Right.
he has potential to actually affect things. And we see he is slightly ineffectual in this episode when Durin Senior said, like, we're going to delve deeper. Who put these limitations on? It's like, well, and Narvi's like, well, you did. He's like, oh, I get rid of them. And Durin's warning him, don't do it. And he's being overruled. So we can see that this is going to be a tension between the two. And I like to think that the reason Durin took the position back is to be back in his father's confidence. Maybe he can mitigate this because his father has instigated 100% tax, 100% tariff on sale goods within
Right.
Khazad-dûm. And you're like, did you go to the Wharton School of Economics? There's only one other person I know of who thinks that staggeringly high tariffs on everything is going to generate income.
Right.
Uh, and his plan for the other rings is to lease them to the other dwarves.
Yeah, I suddenly just got so greedy. I love the symbolism of the collar, which is the designates that Durin Jr. is the prince, because that was a symbol of honor. That was something that earlier when he wore it, it was something he was proud of. Now it's become something of a different kind of collar, like a shackle of a sort, where he sees it, and you can see the fear in his eyes when his father is offering this back to him, and he realizes, okay, I'm being offered this power again, but what are the consequences going to be? What is that going to do to me to be part of this power? Can I mitigate my father's madness if I'm given this position, or am I going to be sucked into it? And Disa sees it right away. When he comes home, what does she focus on? It's this collar, right? And she says, oh no. She understands right away the danger of Durin Jr. being sucked into this power. And he, as you said, I think his motive is that he hopes that he can mitigate, his father's madness somehow. But as you said, he's been entirely ineffective in that role so far. So again, it's his love for his father, maybe, that is overriding his reason in that moment.
But one of the things I actually liked about Durin's how the ring is influencing him. It's not evil.
Right.
It's because the first thing he does is he finds the shafts of
He
light
brings
for
light
Khazad.
back.
He,
Yeah.
he's doing it for Khazad. He's
Right.
going to lease the other rings for a percentage of all of the other Dwarven Kingdom mines because that will enrich Khazad.
Right.
And so it's telling yourself those things because I'm going to do this for the good of my people, but
Right.
is it for the good of his people? And even then, his remark that his hand felt heavy, and
Mm,
that's why he took the ring off, but then forgot about it.
forgot.
Bilbo at the start of the Lord of the Rings, that whole sequence with Gandalf, and
Yeah.
oh, did I put it in my pocket? I'd forgotten. Oh, that feeling, those feelings of it, I thought that was actually a really nice callback because it
I
wasn't
agree.
the obvious recreation of a moment. It was an echo in a different context.
Exactly right. This was well done. Like I was critical earlier because some of the callbacks were just a little too on the nose, like go back to the shadow and that sort of thing. I agree with this one was well handled, and it added to this narrative beautifully in a way that made sense and fit nicely with the lore. So
Yeah.
yeah,
There was that interesting moment with Diza when she's trying to find the resonant crystal or whatever it was.
right, right,
And we can see the lake. And she, puts out her song and it causes the crystal to resonate. So she goes to get it.
right,
And then we hear the roar coming back. And I was looking at that and I went, oh, the Balrog
right. But
in the depths, that they're kind of signaling this. But another thought popped into my head because it was the water.
right,
The watcher in the water from outside the mines of Moria,
right,
outside of Durin's gates.
right.
Which of the two is it? And I think it's going to turn out to be the Balrog.
I
But,
agree. I think it's the Balrog. Yeah.
but I did like because of the water and the rippling across the water that it was actually again one of those nice little moments that nodded toward the other thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I do. It occurred to me that that might be deliberate as well. But I do believe in the end it's going to turn out to be the Balrog because they got to dig deeper now because Durin wants more. And so they're going to, and he's going to ignore Disa's warning.
but
So,
and I think one of the things that Durin said that I thought was really really interesting was now because of the ring he can see every jewel,
yes,
every whereas before they were content. Yeah,
exactly.
they wanted to excavate things and they loved digging. They loved being craftspeople. And Khazad was wealthy and beautiful.
Yep.
And he goes, but we have taken only a thimbleful from this ocean. And you're like, but how much do you need? And it's not about need anymore. It's like, look at what we could have. And that's what I
Power, ambition, greed, beautifully woven into this thread. Yeah.
and it ties directly back to Farazan.
Yeah.
And what he's not being content with improving the life around you, but it's I want that thing, I want it all.
Yeah.
And that that unfettered ambition
Yeah.
dictating everything.
Yeah, it's high tragedy. It's mythological kind of storytelling that I really enjoy. They're doing well with it. I think in these threads in this episode, really good stuff. Anything else for Khazad-dûm, or shall we move on to the final and main thread in the show?
Well, I know I just mentioned it, but it's just when Durin says, I am proud of you.
Uh-huh.
And it was just that's exactly what the other Durin wanted to hear, but he knows it's not coming from the place that he wants.
Right.
And the moment that I think balances so well with that was the moment that you pointed out where he and Deezer are together and she makes him promise not to put on the ring. But we
Yeah.
have seen them shopping together. We've seen that domestic side. And then now that the light is back, tending to the tree
Yes.
that Elrond had given them. that's about life and growth.
Yeah.
And what we see that neatly contrasted with Durin about, no, it's about digging down into the darkness. It's about getting more cold wealth.
Right. Right.
Whereas the thing that Disa and Durin are tending to is life and growth, and there's a warmth to what they are reaching for. And
Yeah.
I think that is really interesting for the show to be examining.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I also want to compliment the acting in this show because I thought it was really excellent. As always, the music, the cinematography, they excel in these areas. I've had my ups and downs personally with some of the storytelling, but they always excel with, and they're not easy to do, the visuals and the soundtrack. But in Eregion, I was very much a fan of this dance that's going on between Anatar or Sauron on the one hand and Celebrimbor on the other, where you have this back and forth where there are moments when you think, Celebrimbor understands how he's being manipulated. There's that one moment when he says, "You're really good at putting ideas in people's heads and making them think that they thought of these ideas in the first place." But then then Anatar makes another move. It's like he's able to stay a step or two ahead. But there's this delicate dance going on, tension, whatever you like. But you see Celebrimbor being I mean, you could say that in a way, Anatar is his Mephistopheles, and Celebrimbor is very much a Faustian figure here who is brilliant and wants to do this for the good of humanity and dwarves and elves and everyone else, but wants to do great things and has this ambition. And it's mixed in with good motives. He certainly keeps the good motives forefront, right? But also there's that ambition and that, this is about my great creation. And Anatar very skillfully keeps leading him along, with this motivation, and also poisoning the minds of some of Celebrimbor's followers very skillfully as well, just masterfully. I just thought the whole thing was really well done, and again, highlighting these great themes of ambition and pride and power and all these things. Just really good stuff here. Do you agree?
Yeah, and like I said, that scene at the beginning with Celebrimbor and Narvi, and he's making the joke, and it's like we're gonna come together. It's like elves and dwarves being friends, and like all the dwarves are on one side, all the elves are on the other. Like,
Right?
eh, eh, eh. Still not exactly mixing, but at the same time, it goes to that what Tolkien talked about Eregion and all of the great craftspeople of the world coming together to create wonders in Eregion. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So we get that dropped in. But again, Celebrimbor being the slightly he's not a good public speaker. He's a fantastic craftsman.
Right.
And like he's trying to be the host and give the good speech. And he makes that joke about, oh yeah, like Narvi's great, but he'll also steal things. And you're like, oh, like and you know that in his head he was going, I'm going to tell this as a joke and everyone's going to find it funny. And you're like,
Going over like a lead balloon.
oh, but you had that wonderful sequence and Sauron and Natar looking on and walking away from it because this is the last thing he wants. He
Right.
doesn't want elves and dwarves being friends, and so he kind of walks away and he's like, "How can I? How can I?" And it's, I thought you were going to keep it short. You're like, "Ooh, you dirty dog."
Yeah. Yeah.
He's so mean. Um, but the
Very petty. Yeah.
constant whittling down and needling of Celebrimbor. And then the whole, oh, well, the reason that didn't work, well, maybe it's because you lied.
Ooh.
You know, this, these rings, it's not just the mechanical nature of them, they are spiritual. And so we get some idea, which I think caters to a lot of the modern audience's expectation that there are rules to how things are made. Here are the stats of this magical item. This is how this magical item works. These are its listed effects. It cannot do. People are obsessed with magic systems in a lot of modern fantasy. It has taken over the genre so much so that when people want to talk about magic, they almost automatically defer to talking about magic systems as
Right.
if everything must be systematized,
Right.
which Tolkien clearly doesn't do. That is not what he believes in. There are philosophies behind what he did, but he never detailed it. It doesn't go into that sort of level of detail and mechanism. But I thought it was a really nice nod to include that about, oh, we're going to have different designs for the rings, as if there's some way that they're being put together is what is going on here.
Yeah.
And Celebrimbor doesn't fully understand their interactions. And of course, he's being lied to by Sauron, and Sauron is manipulating all of these things, and Sauron is doing this, and Sauron is undermining his confidence, and Sauron is suborning his craftspeople, and Sauron is piling on the guilt, piling on the pressure, piling on the anxiety. Oh, the dwarven rings aren't working. We must have done something wrong. Oh, wait, we did. And even I think
Naughty,
he actually
naughty,
says,
liar, liar, pants on fire.
I
Yeah.
think he actually says we lied to Gilgalad when it's no, no,
Well, and
no,
he
no, no.
says, actually, Celebrimbor asks him, "Did you do something different?" And he says, "No." And then there's a pause, and then he says, "We did something, right?" And then you could see the wheels spinning in Sauron's head, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I know I can do now." Yeah.
But it's the way that he says we when he knows Celebrimbor is going to go, well, we didn't do it. I did it.
Right.
And so now he feels responsible for these rings not working correctly or as intended. And what's he going to do? And the whole Anatar saying, "I will make the nine myself,"
Right.
and Celebrimbor will go, "Yeah, fine, whatever. I'm not getting involved." And then, well, it does with the whole incident with the invisibility, and you can see Celebrimbor was about to tell them what they did wrong,
Right.
and he's like, "Oh no, but the way that you correct that is," and is interrupted before he can say, and you can see that, like Sauron's going, just
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
finish your set, and it's like Durin has arrived. What? No, no, I'll deal with that in a minute. About the rings, and it's like, be right back.
Yeah. Yeah.
BRB.
And I also love the contrast between this gruff dwarf who is telling the truth, who is very honest, and these rings are doing something. What did you do with these rings? My father is going crazy, and Anatar's smoothness, his grace, his charisma. That's a great contrast. And you have Celebrimbor in the middle trying to decide which one is right. And it's great.
And again, a lot of what I like about this, people being motivated to do the right thing for the right reasons, but being manipulated by other people who are shaping it for the wrong reasons.
Right.
Because Celebrimbor wants to help heal the world. And his craft is a way to do it. So it appeals to his ambition, but it's not solely about his ambition.
Right.
He does want to do good and he does want to help, but he has worries and he has these stresses and he is being manipulated. And you can see how the good are being manipulated by the bad.
Yeah.
And I I actually enjoy that. It's not a straightforward Sauron evil. Sauron tricked him. Sauron made him do this. Then
Right.
Sauron raised army. Sauron conquered. Sauron, like this is showing us a way that it could have happened, a way that it's exploring these things so we can understand how all of these different storylines are actually connected. And with so many strong thematic links between it all, this is why I sometimes get a little frustrated. People go, "Oh, it's just bad writing." But
Actually, to tell you the truth, it helps me to appreciate this show is helping me to appreciate the aptness of the symbolism, not allegory, but symbolism that Tolkien set up with these rings and how they are, as object of such power, a mixture of potential good and potential evil. I think it's really kind of cool how you see this play out and with this interpretation of this very just kind of alluded to very bare bones description that we have from the lore, right?
yeah. And part of it is I do appreciate those thematic links and the exploration of theme. That's one of the things I love, which is why I enjoy this type of storytelling.
Right.
But other people who want consistency in the lore, you're like, yeah, this is not going to please you. And
Mm.
and that's fine. But for me, that's not the defining aspect of what I find interesting in narrative.
Right.
And one of the things I loved, that sequence with, is it Merdania, the young woman who had put on the ring and became invisible.
Right. Right.
And Sauron, she saw
Sauron.
what was his Einar name? Was it Myron? I was like, in my head I was calling Marion. And I go,
Oh,
it's
you
not.
mean he was actually a Maya. What was his name then?
I think it's Myron. But because I have a funny feeling the letters are the same as Marion, but in a slightly different order. And it
Okay.
just in my head always self-corrects to Marion. And I'm like, he's Marion.
All I
Um,
remember is Gandalf was Aloran, I think, right? Yeah.
but she sees his true form, the
Yes.
corrupted, the corrupted Maya. And
He's like, oh no, that was Celebrimbor. Yeah.
you go, you get, oh, that is so like the projection of that. And of course, Celebrimbor he isn't a people person. He is slightly gruff, and he's about the perfection of his craft, and like
Yeah.
everyone knows that. And then to seal the deal on this, so to speak,
You look just like Galadriel. Yeah.
the one, your hair, when the light caught your hair, the one thing about Galadriel that everyone, like Fëanor, wanted her hair because it had
Yeah.
caught the light of the,
And you see her melt in that
and
moment.
you're like, oh, being manipulated, and you see how clearly, and it ties so neatly into the end with Galadriel being brought to Adar's camp,
Yes, we have to talk about that final
the
moment.
orc reaching out to grab the hair, and
Yes.
Adar stopping him.
Yes.
So again, that really nice little connection, and these moments that you see connected all the way through, these are evidence of good writing. It mightn't be the type of writing we want, but to say that it is bad
I think
is
it's
ignoring what it
overlooking
is
a lot.
doing
Yeah.
and what it is trying to do. But yeah, I love this sort of experimentation with the rings, of trying to blend that modern sensibility and desire for a magic system with what Tolkien was actually doing, which is magic as something ineffable, something unknowable, something liminal, um, something of the divine, and being connected to that ethereal nature, that it defies definition this way.
Yeah.
And part of it is even like Celebrimbor's arrogance, that he could take something that is so sacred and unknowable and try to pin it down,
Right. Right.
try to make it into a material science.
Yeah.
That arrogance. And I think that for me, that's part of what it's exploring. And I enjoyed that.
Yeah, well said. And about that ending, we'll finish on that with Galadriel and the Adar essentially coming to a point of understanding. Sorry for the pun, because she's holding, of course, the very sharp object at his throat at the moment. But he's making a good point there, which is, hey, we have a common enemy. I'm kind of hoping maybe you'll work with me here, which is, we saw that coming.
And I think one of the things that I found fascinating with Adar's storyline, because they lent into Christopher Tolkien's selection of the orcs being corrupted elves and Adar being one of the first. So, yes, being corrupted and the progenitor of a line of orcs, but he is still an elf.
Right.
And so, those, like at the end of the last episode, you had that he used that traditional greeting,
Mm-hmm.
elvish greeting, elf to Galadriel, because he is still an elf,
Right.
even if he has been corrupted. And now with Galadriel, no, I didn't take you here as prisoner. I wanted you here as an ally because we need to take down Sauron.
Right.
And yeah, this is how alliances are made by world powers who do not agree.
Right.
It's not always as clear cut as they're the bad guys, go kill them. Like Adar and the orcs are not good. No one is suggesting they are good. But this is early in their journey. Or well, it's partway through their journey, really.
Right.
But this is before Sauron has instigated his domination of the orcs. And we can see that, yeah, they're still cruel. Yeah, they're still mean and nasty and horrible, but they do have their own personal motivations. And
Hmm.
I know people complained about that orc family in the previous episode, but that seems so natural that, yeah, they can hate outsiders, they can be xenophobic, they can be cruel, they
Right.
can hate other orcs, but they still might care about their particular family.
Well, they wouldn't live very long as a species if they didn't care for their own offspring, right?
And so I think it's a perfectly reasonable and rational explanation and exploration of that concept. There are other ways that they could have gone, but it doesn't break lore or break canon to have that,
Right.
because eventually Sauron will take over, and then the orcs, over the following centuries, their culture will change, unless people think that, oh no, but orcs are always just this one thing. Then how did they start off as corrupted elves? Oh, but orcs are just this thing. You're like, no, there's room to interpret it, because Tolkien played around with different ideas and never fully settled on it.
That's the
How do we
issue.
show that in a story?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You have to
so
you
yeah,
have to commit to an interpretation, and that's what they've done, you know.
um, yeah. So like from this, there were a number of different highlights in this particular. I did like this episode. Sauron giving the reason for why they make 9 rings for the
Yes.
men, and it's the 3 times 3, and you go, oh, the rule of threes being invoked. You
Yeah.
go, yeah, that I actually love that. That's the fairy tale aspect, the mythic aspect, the importance of the rule of three, and
Yep.
it's thrice named and thrice cursed and blah blah blah. Like it's all of that sort of stuff, and you go, that and it almost felt like this completely throwaway line, and yet it fitted so perfectly into it
Yeah.
for this type of storytelling. And you know, Celebrimbor, now almost broken by the pressure, giving that awful motivational speech.
Yeah.
And as he walks away, and we see him shaking, and we see
Shaking. Yeah.
the he's becoming broken by all of this. And then in the background, Sauron giving that, come here, everyone. You're like, don't worry, he's not in a great mood, but I appreciate you, I love you, and
Yeah.
together we're a team. And you're like, I've been to those seminars, and yes, I do think that they sound like Sauron.
Oh, I'm so with you there. But I love the shaking of his hand. These are the instruments of his genius, right? And he's now having doubts about what am I doing here? Am I, it's a brilliantly done sequence, I think. Yeah.
And that's when you had mentioned earlier about that you really like the acting. I think sometimes the acting in this is great, and particularly like that moment when you see the tremble in his hands, for a craftsman, a master craftsman, to no longer be able to control his hands.
Right.
That that's how much he has been undermined. And like that one little telltale moment. And there are so many moments like that through this, that I love so much about this. And I know I was a wee bit down on the last episode,
Right.
but part of that is my frustration with that conflation of everything, and then trying to cram too much in too short a time frame. And every once in a while I'll circle back to that point, but ultimately that was a creative decision made.
Yeah.
I have to see what they do with it.
I think you have to give
And
it the whole season before you can render a final verdict, at least,
yeah,
right?
and I have to see what they do with it, rather than I wish they had done this instead.
Right.
Because every single one of us is always going to have oh, I wish they had done this thing. And
Mhm.
very few of us will have identical things that we wanted them to have done.
Oh, I know. It's so true. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then so, oh yeah, but I just wanted it to be good. And I was like, but what you think of as good is not necessarily what I think of as good.
Right. But we are here to sort of call out what we think has been done well and the things that didn't work so well for us. That's what the best we can do. And we're doing that job, that task we've given ourselves.
Although we talk about this stuff anyway, and it's fun to record some of
Oh,
it.
it's just fun. Yeah. Yeah. But I'm having fun. I did like this episode again. I feel I was still looking forward to watching the rest of the season, but I feel a little reinvested after episode 5. and I hope they can finish on some strong episodes. That little wobble with episodes 3 and especially 4, I can overlook that if we have a strong finish to the season. So yeah.
There was something I wanted to mention to you was when Sauron had said that maybe Durin is misusing the ring, and I just had this vision of Celebrimbor going, "Oh, did we forget to send the manual? Oh," and then it's, "Oh, hang on, we gave him a 90-day guarantee. He's going to return that. Oh, what are we going to do?" And it's
Oh.
I had to chuckle to myself about the misusing the ring as if, well, I didn't. Have you tried turning it off and turning it on again?
Yeah.
It's, and it's
It always
I
works
think
for me. Yeah.
I think sometimes that's why when people go into the whole magic system thing and they go, oh, that's what pops into my head sometimes about it. Whereas I loved what Tolkien had done with magic being far more numinous.
Well, and I like the shows, I think it's Sauron who says it, it's not just about the mechanics of it. It's about the spirit. It's about
Yeah.
the intent, and all that. And that's pretty, you know, nebulous, soft magic kind of stuff there. I like that. I personally prefer a bit of wonder and mystery in my magic. So yeah.
Well, Philip, thank you so much for having me on to talk about this. This is great.
Yep, this is fun, and we'll be talking about episode 6 over at A Critical Dragon, and then we just have it's only 8 episodes, right? So 7 and 8, and
Yeah,
it'll
close to the end.
be ending before we know it. But thank you all for sticking with us till the end of this video, and we will see you over at A Critical Dragon next time.